I thought my problems were over the day I divorced Victor after 28 long years of control and manipulation. But 5 months later he was banging on my door, shouting threats about what he would do if I dared to find someone new. What he didn't know, and what even I had almost forgotten, was that the person he feared most was not a stranger. It was someone from my past. Someone who had every reason to come back into my life. Let's start at the beginning of the story, and I'll tell you everything in order. I used to think that once the divorce papers were signed, the world would finally tilt back onto its proper axis. After all, 5 months had passed since I'd become Nora Hart, single woman, 62, retired art teacher, birdwatcher, amateur potter, proud owner of a ficus that refuses to die. I thought peace would arrive like a package from the post office, delayed, maybe a little dented, but still showing up eventually. Well, that morning I found out peace must have gotten lost somewhere between here and Topeka, because the pounding at my condo door nearly rattled the hinges right off. And there he was, Victor Lane, my ex-husband of 28 long years, standing there like he was auditioning for the role of most aggrieved man alive. Victor had always believed the world owed him a stage. Even now, with his thinning hair sticking up like it had been styled by static electricity and his polo shirt buttoned wrong. Yes, wrong, the man couldn't even line up buttons, which is ironic for someone who used to lecture me about attention to detail. He still carried himself like everyone else was a background actor in the Victor show. He jabbed a finger in my direction. You try dating, Nora, and you'll find out who I really am. Now, once upon a time, that tone of voice would have sent me scurrying like a cat who'd just been caught on the counter. I used to let that booming authority get to me. I'd fold laundry faster, cook quieter, even breathe smaller, if you can imagine such a thing. But 5 months of freedom had done something marvelous to me. I'd remembered how to take up space in my own home. So instead of cowering, I pressed my palm flat against the doorframe, leaned a little on it like I had all the time in the world and said, "You already showed me." His eyes bulged like I'd just thrown a glass of water in his face. Victor wasn't used to comebacks. For nearly 3 decades he'd had the last word in every argument, even the ones where I didn't realize we were arguing until I was apologizing. But this time? Oh, this time he was flustered, and I'll admit it. I savored it the way I savor that first spoonful of peach cobbler. He shifted tactics, lowering his voice as though the hallway itself might be eavesdropping. "What about Jonah, huh? You lied that boy out of a father. My stepson deserved better." That was Victor's favorite trick, bringing up Jonah whenever he wanted to land a blow. My son, my only child, my heart walking around outside my body, was 41 now, but Victor still tried to wield his name like a weapon. "Jonah's a grown man," I reminded him. "He can decide for himself who he calls family." Victor sneered, his lips curling like he'd just bitten into something sour. "Decide for himself? Please. You poisoned him against me. You always wanted me out of the picture." And there it was, the real fear behind all his bluster. That Jonah might see through him. That people might notice the emperor wasn't wearing clothes, unless you count that poorly buttoned polo. I stood a little taller, even though my knees creak like old rocking chairs when I do. "Victor," I said, "Jonah never needed me to tell him who you were. You handled that part all by yourself." Now, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but watching the fury flash across his face was delicious. Not because I like confrontation, I don't. Arguing gives me indigestion, but because for once I wasn't shrinking. For once he looked small. The truth is, I didn't raise my voice and I didn't throw anything. I didn't need to. Sometimes the sharpest blade is calm certainty. When he realized I wasn't going to break, Victor muttered something about pathetic little lives and stormed off, making sure his shoes squeaked loudly against the hallway floor so the whole building knew how upset he was. That was his style, drama with a side of self-pity. I closed the door, slid the chain and leaned against it. My heart was racing, yes, but not the way it used to. It wasn't fear that made it beat so hard, it was exhilaration, relief, even joy. For the first time in 28 years, I'd stood tall in the storm, and the storm had walked away sputtering. And let me tell you, at 62 that feels better than any spa treatment or fancy wine. That morning I realized something important. Peace doesn't just arrive on your doorstep like a package. Sometimes you have to wrestle it back with your own 2 hands and then guard it fiercely. And if someone comes pounding on the door demanding you hand it over, well, you stand there and tell them, "You already showed me who you are." And then you smile because you know you finally learned who you are too. 2 days after Victor stomped out of my hallway like a man auditioning for World's Loudest Exit, I woke up with a tightness in my chest so sharp I thought my number was up. It felt as if someone had cinched a leather belt around my ribs and yanked it until I could barely get air in. I sat straight up in bed, clutching at my nightgown like that might somehow fix it. I remember thinking, well, Nora, at least you folded the laundry yesterday, so if the neighbors find you, they won't have to step over socks on the floor. Just as suddenly as it started, the pressure eased. I sat there panting, hair plastered to my forehead, wondering what on earth had just happened. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was indigestion from the leftover chili I'd eaten. But then it happened again later that morning. I was in the kitchen brewing chamomile tea, my go-to comfort drink, because I've never trusted coffee drinkers who say it doesn't make them jittery. That's like someone saying they can eat 3 donuts and not feel a thing. I was holding my favorite mug, the one painted with little robins, when my chest squeezed, my vision tunneled, and I thought, good Lord, this is it. This is how I go. Mid-morning, alone in a robe with curlers in my hair. I dropped the mug, and it shattered on the tile like a gunshot. I stood there gripping the counter, trying not to keel over. When my breathing finally calmed down, I realized my hands were still shaking so badly, I couldn't even clean up the shards. That was enough to get me to pick up the phone and call Maya Vega, the nurse practitioner at the clinic. Maya had been after me for years to mind my stress levels, though she always said it in that professional, kind way that doesn't make you defensive. I half expected her to scold me for waiting so long, but instead she said, come in this afternoon. Don't drive if you're not steady. So I went. I sat there in her little office, paper crinkling under me, fluorescent lights humming overhead, while she asked me about what happened. When I described it, her face softened. Nora, she said, those sound like panic attacks. I blinked at her. Me? Panic attacks? No, you must be mistaken. I'm the calm one, the steady one, the one who made peace at Thanksgiving while Victor tried to argue about cranberry sauce. She smiled gently. That calm was survival. You've lived in high alert for almost 3 decades. Your nervous system has been running like a car engine with the pedal stuck to the floor. Now that you're out of that environment, your body is finally trying to reset. Reset. She made it sound so simple, like restarting the cable box. But inside it felt like coming apart. She explained that my body had carried years of stress, quietly holding it all in so I could keep functioning. Now that the constant pressure was gone, it was letting go in ways I couldn't control. Think of it like the first time you sit down after holding a heavy box too long, she said. Your arms shake, not because you're weak, but because you were strong for too long. I left the clinic with a small prescription to help when things got overwhelming and a promise to try some breathing exercises that sounded a lot more complicated than they probably were. As I drove home, I thought about that word, reset. It's funny, isn't it? I'd spent so many years trying not to rock the boat that my body had turned into its own little storm. And now that the stormbringer himself was out of my house, my body didn't know what to do with the quiet. Reset, Maya had said. Maybe that's what this was, the painful, messy process of remembering how to just be Nora again. That night, after the whole chest-tightening scare and Maya's gentle lecture, I found myself staring at the hallway closet. You know the kind of closet I mean, the one you tell yourself you'll organize one of these days, but instead keep cramming with coats, wrapping paper, and boxes you don't want to deal with. Mine had one box in particular that had followed me through every move, hidden behind quilts and forgotten Christmas decorations. I fetched a chair, wobbled onto it like a circus act. If my neighbor Ivy had peeked through her peephole, she probably would have called the paramedics on principle, and dragged down the shoebox. It was lighter than I remembered, but it still held the weight of an entire life. When I lifted the lid, a faint smell of old paper and something sweet hit me. Maybe tobacco, maybe just time. Right on top was a pressed fern, delicate and brittle. Adrian had given it to me on one of our long walks in the park. So it doesn't wither, he'd said, tucking it between the pages of a book. Well, it had withered, but it was still here. Proof of something gentle. Beneath that was a yellow train ticket from a jazz show 2 towns over. Adrian had insisted we go, even though I complained about the late hour. Live music is medicine, he told me, and wouldn't you know, he was right. We danced in the aisle that night, and I laughed so hard my sides ached the whole train ride home. Then there were the letters. Dozens of them, written on creamy paper with his neat, steady handwriting. Some smelled faintly of cigarettes. He'd smoked back then, though he'd always keep it outside because I wrinkled my nose about it. The words inside weren't flashy or dramatic. They were simple promises, everyday hopes. Notes about a song he was mixing, or how Jonah's curls caught the sunlight when they played on the floor. He'd sign them with little sketches in the margins, tiny treble clefs and cartoon birds. And the photos. Lord, the photos. One of me in a sundress, laughing at something he said. Jonah perched on his hip like he belonged there, which he did. Another of Adrian pushing Jonah on a swing at the park, the both of them grinning like conspirators. I sat there on the floor, photos spread around me, and felt something crack wide open. Adrian Cole. 63 now if he was still alive. My first love. Jonah's real father. The man I let slip away because my mother told me dreams couldn't put food on the table. And my sister warned me that stability mattered more than passion. They pointed at Victor with his steady job at the radio station, his buttoned-up certainty, and told me, "That's the kind of man you need." And I, fool that I was, listened. I told myself choosing Victor was being responsible, mature, safe. But sitting there, surrounded by that shoebox, I saw the truth. It hadn't been safety. It had been fear. Victor hadn't just taken me away from Adrian. He'd stolen Jonah's story too. My son had grown up with half-truths and silences, never knowing his real father was a man who once carried him proudly through the park, who dreamed of houses with gardens and music pouring out of every room. And that realization, more than anything else, settled like a stone in my chest. Because it wasn't just my heart Victor had trampled all those years. It was Jonah's truth, Jonah's history. And that was something I could never get back. I closed the shoebox carefully, but this time I didn't shove it behind the quilts. I left it out in the open because hiding it had been my first mistake. Victor's harassment did not fade with time. It fermented. 14 calls in a single day, beginning before breakfast and pinging through supper like a smoke alarm with opinions. The voicemail swung wildly, first the syrupy, "just checking on you," then the prickly lectures about responsibility, then back to concern so sweet it gave me a sugar headache. I stopped answering. I also stopped pretending it wasn't rattling me. Every time his name lit my screen, my hand shook, and my poor ficus shed another leaf, as if it too were allergic to nonsense. He took his act on the road. At the clinic, he parked himself in the lobby chairs with a folded magazine. He never read and announced to anyone who would listen that he was concerned for Nora's grasp on reality. A volunteer offered him water. He declined because hydration would have made it harder to look tragic. I walked in, saw him, and did a full stop so abrupt my purse swung like a pendulum. The receptionist gave me the kind of look you reserve for toddlers and small dogs. Gentle, but ready to intervene. I decided I was done starring in Victor's hallway theater. Back home, I called the sheriff's office and left a neat message. 2 hours later, Deputies Lila Gomez and Mark Bell arrived. Polite, steady, and dressed like the human equivalent of a firm handshake. We sat at my tiny kitchen table while Lila took notes in careful block letters, and Mark admired the lopsided bowl I just pulled from the kiln. "Rustic," he said, which is Midwestern for, "the bottom is a little wobbly." I told them about the calls, the lobby performance, the way my phone now sounded like trouble. Lila tapped her pen. "We can issue a no-contact warning today. If you're comfortable, we'll deliver it in person at his workplace." I am many things, grandmother, birder, woman who still hoards rubber bands. Comfortable was not one of them. But I was tired of conducting my life around Victor's weather. "Let's do it," I said, and my voice surprised me by not trembling. We rode in their cruiser because, as Mark put it, it makes folks take a conversation seriously. The back seat smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee. I sat upright like a student on the first day of school. Lila drove with both hands at 10 and 2, narrating turns in a calm way that made even my jumpy heart behave. We passed the river, which wore a thin ribbon of sunlight, and then the brick building came into view. Riversound 92, the station where Victor produced mornings and bad moods. Inside, the lobby looked like a shrine to volume. Gold records under glass, signed posters with dramatic fonts, a shadow box of defunct microphones. The air carried that clean, cool scent of a place that prefers its fingerprints on the music, not the furniture. A receptionist in headphones smiled and held up an index finger. the universal sign for 1 second, and gestured toward a seating area dressed in cheerful blue vinyl. I perched on the edge and tried to slow my breathing. Lila checked a clipboard. Mark studied a wall-sized collage labeled 25 Years on Air. I followed his gaze. The collage was a mosaic of parties, remotes, charity drives, backstage grins, decades of faces with their arms slung over each other, frozen mid-laugh. My eyes slid across the grid, lazy at first, then snagged on a familiar outline the way a sweater catches on a nail. There, in the back of a group shot from an anniversary gala, stood a man taller than the rest, shoulders easy, smile small but certain, silver at the temples, gentle eyes that looked like a pause between notes. Hands I remembered because they were always careful with anything breakable, including me. Adrian. Older, yes. Weathered in the good way, like a well-loved instrument. Unmistakable. The sound in the room dulled, as if the lobby itself had taken a breath and held it with me. Lila's pen scratched softly. Mark cleared his throat. The receptionist's headset blinked a tiny green light. Somewhere down the hall, a song faded and a jingle chirped. And I stood there, shoes planted on a floor that suddenly felt like a dock tipping under a new tide, staring at a paper square that reached through 29 stubborn years and touched the center of my chest. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My heart knew the name before my mouth could form it. The morning after that discovery in the lobby, I told myself I had errands. Important errands like buying more birdseed or a new sponge for the kitchen sink. But somehow my feet carried me to the tea shop across the street from River Sound 92. It was the kind of place with chalkboard menus, mismatched teapots, and a faint smell of cinnamon that stuck to your sweater. I ordered a pot of Earl Grey and parked myself at a corner table, pretending to read the community bulletin board. Tai Chi for seniors. Knitting circle every Thursday. Lost parakeet named Blueberry. I stared at those notices as if they were riveting novels, but inside I was a bundle of jangling nerves. I told myself I wasn't waiting for him. I told myself I was just enjoying tea. But at exactly 11:30 the door chimed and there he was. Adrian. Older, yes, hair more silver than dark, laugh lines etched deeper, but the same steady presence. He spotted me instantly, and that half smile of his, the one that always made me feel like I was the only person in the room, appeared just as it used to. I figured you'd be here, he said, sliding into the chair across from me as if no years had passed at all. My first thought was how absurd it was to still feel my pulse skitter at my age. My second thought was that he still smelled faintly of cedar and clean laundry, the way he always had. We ordered more tea. He chose green because apparently he'd gotten health conscious. I teased him about abandoning coffee, and he grinned, admitting he still snuck it when deadlines loomed. Then we settled into conversation, the kind that slipped into place like a favorite cardigan. He told me about the years after we'd parted, how he threw himself into work starting small, repairing audio equipment, then managing small gigs, until it grew into something bigger than he'd imagined. Eventually, he had enough success to buy majority ownership in River Sound Media. I never expected to own a station, he said, but sound has always been home to me. Then he leaned back, studying me with those same gentle eyes. I recognized Victor's name when he joined the station about 5 years ago. I knew who he was, but he didn't know me. I never said anything. The words hung between us, heavy but not bitter. And you? He asked carefully. Did you ever think of me? I wanted to laugh and cry all at once. Every single day of my marriage, I admitted, voice softer than I meant. When Jonah took his first steps, when we moved houses, even at the holidays when Victor made a fuss over carving the turkey, I'd catch myself wondering how different things would have been. He looked down, then back at me. I thought of you too. I kept a photo of Jonah in my wallet for years. Still do. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. Well, I suppose we're both sentimental old fools. We talked for 2 hours. About little things, gardens, recipes, how neither of us ever learned to program a DVR, and about heavier things too. The silence we'd both carried, the choices made out of fear, the years that stretched between us like a stubborn bridge. When I finally glanced at the clock, it startled me. 2 hours gone, and it felt like 10 minutes. The weight of nearly 30 years pressed down on me, but for the first time it didn't feel crushing. It felt like something shifting, like maybe the past wasn't just a door slammed shut, For the first time in a long while, I thought maybe it wasn't too late. Adrian invited me to see his old house on the edge of town, the one he'd bought all those years ago when we were still young and making plans that never got their chance. The house sat on a quiet road lined with maples, their branches arching like an old cathedral. It wasn't fancy white siding, shutters in need of paint, but it had the kind of bones that made you believe in staying put. We walked through the rooms and I felt like a trespasser in the life I should have lived. The kitchen had wide windows that looked out onto the backyard. There, beyond the patch of garden gone a little wild, stood the swing set. The wood was gray and weathered, the bolts spotted with rust, but it stood sturdy as ever. I remembered when Adrian built it, how he worked until dark, hammering and sanding, determined that Jonah would have something better than the flimsy plastic contraptions at the park. "You kept it," I said, touching the worn beam. "I couldn't bring myself to take it down," he admitted. "Some things are worth waiting for." A week later, Jonah came by with his daughter, Tasha. She was 6, all elbows and boundless energy, with a laugh that could rattle the clouds. I hadn't told her anything about Adrian. Kids don't need speeches, they just need to see for themselves. The minute we stepped into the yard, Tasha spotted the swing set. "Grandma, can I?" she squealed. Before I could answer, she was already climbing onto the seat. Adrian strode across the grass like he'd been waiting decades for this moment. "Hold tight," he told her gently, and then gave the swing a push. She squealed, "Higher," and he obliged, pushing her up into the sky. Her braids flew, her laughter spilled over the fence, and my heart ached in the best way. I glanced at Jonah. He stood frozen, his arms crossed, but his eyes never left the scene. For years, Victor had painted Adrian as some kind of careless dreamer, the kind of man who vanished when responsibility knocked. Jonah had grown up with that portrait, and I'd been too afraid to challenge it. But there was Adrian, steady hands on the ropes, patient voice calling encouragement, joy written all over his face. No lectures, no pride, just the pure delight of being chosen by a child who didn't know any of the old history. Tasha turned, waving. "Push me, Grandpa," she shouted. The word landed like a small miracle. She hadn't been prompted, she hadn't been told. She simply knew what he was to her. Jonah's mouth twitched, and I recognized the exact expression he used to make as a boy when he didn't want to admit he liked something. Later, when Tasha was inside devouring cookies like they were disappearing gold coins, Jonah pulled me aside. "He's nothing like what Victor made him sound like," he said quietly. I felt tears sting, but I kept my voice even. "No, he isn't. He never was." Jonah nodded slowly, still watching Adrian through the window as he rinsed glasses at the sink. For the first time in years, I saw my son's walls beginning to crack, not in a way that would break him, but in a way that might finally let the light in. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was losing him anymore. 2 months slipped by, and life had begun to feel lighter. Then one afternoon the phone rang. It was Harold Benton, the station director at River Sound 92. His tone was polite but carried that undertone of someone who's had just about enough of something. "I thought you'd want to know," he said. "Victor's no longer with us." He cursed out an advertiser during a live segment, something about their pathetic jingle. And well, that was the final straw. Security escorted him out before he could finish his coffee. I nearly dropped the receiver. Victor had always bragged about being indispensable, about how the station would crumble without him. To picture him being walked out mid-rant, tie askew, coffee cup abandoned, was so absurd I nearly laughed. I thanked Harold, hung up, and sat in my kitchen feeling a mixture of relief and disbelief. But Victor wasn't finished making scenes. A few days later, I heard the low hum of his car creeping down our cul-de-sac. I was on the porch watering my geraniums, and sure enough, there it was, his silver sedan, moving slower than a parade float. He passed once, then again. By the third round, even the neighborhood squirrels looked suspicious. Adrian was in the backyard staking tomato plants, wearing his old gardening hat that made him look like he was about to audition for a seed catalog. He didn't pause when the car finally stopped. Victor climbed out, his face pinched and red, his eyes darting from me to the house. "We need to talk, Nora," he called, his voice carrying that old mixture of authority and desperation. Before I could even respond, Adrian straightened up, brushing dirt from his hands. He had a calmness about him, The kind that doesn't come from bluster but from knowing exactly where you stand. No, you don't, Adrian said evenly. You need to leave. Victor blinked, thrown off balance. And who are you to tell me what I need? Adrian's gaze was steady. I'm Adrian Cole, Jonah's father. And Victor, I own the station you just got thrown out of. You could almost hear the air go out of Victor's balloon. His face went pale, as though someone had pulled the plug on all his bluster. For a moment, he swayed, mouth opening and closing like a man who'd misplaced his script. There was no shouting, no grand argument. Just silence stretching across the garden, punctuated by the soft creak of the swing in the yard, and the lazy buzz of a bee near the tomatoes. Victor glanced at me, maybe hoping I'd jump in, but I simply stood there, holding the watering can, finally unwilling to rescue him from the messes he created. Without another word, he turned, climbed back into his car, and drove away. I watched the sedan disappear down the street, taillights flashing as he rounded the corner. That was the last time I saw him. I set the watering can down, walked over to Adrian, and together we admired the neat row of tomato plants standing tall in the sun. There was no cheering, no dramatic finale, just the quiet satisfaction that comes when the storm finally passes and you realize you're still standing, roots deeper than ever. These days, Sundays have turned into my favorite day of the week, which is saying something because I've always been partial to Fridays. Fridays used to mean a paycheck and the guilty pleasure of bringing home a rotisserie chicken instead of cooking. Now Sundays mean family. Real family, the kind that fills your kitchen with noise and crumbs and the sort of laughter that sneaks into your bones. Jonah comes over with Tasha, and the house wakes up the moment they step inside. Tasha usually barrels straight past me with a shout of, "Grandma, where's Grandpa Ade?" As if I'm just the doorman for her favorite person. Adrian will already be out back, fussing with his workbench, and she'll run to him like he's Santa Claus with a hammer. He teaches her to measure twice before pounding a nail, even though she mostly ignores the rule and whacks away with more enthusiasm than precision. The first birdhouse they built looked like it had been designed by a committee of squirrels, but I swear Tasha was more proud of that lopsided creation than if it had been a palace. Adrian treated it like a masterpiece, of course, holding it up to the light and declaring it perfectly whimsical. Meanwhile, I stay in the kitchen with my clay, glazing bowls and humming to myself. I can hear them through the window, her squeals, his patient instructions, the occasional clang when the hammer finds everything but the nail. My phone buzzes with photos Jonah sends. Tasha holding up a birdhouse, Adrian beaming beside her, the two of them smeared with sawdust like a badge of honor. And me? Instead of messages filled with accusations, or the sound of a man's voice trying to grind me down, my phone now delivers nothing but joy. It's like trading in a constant storm for postcards of sunshine. As for Victor, the last I heard, he's holed up in a dingy apartment on the other side of town. Someone told me he spends his days writing angry letters to old colleagues, insisting the station collapsed without him. It didn't. The station is thriving, thank you very much. Bitter, forgotten, and still convinced he's the center of a universe that moved on without him. Do I feel sorry for him? Occasionally. I suppose it's natural after sharing nearly 3 decades with someone. But then I glance around my life now, the birdhouses drying on the porch, the tomatoes ripening in Adrian's garden, Tasha's laughter spilling through the house, Jonah finally looking at me without walls in his eyes, and I remember something important. Victor chose bitterness. I chose love. And the sweetest revenge isn't shouting, or slamming doors, or rehearsing clever comebacks in the shower. The sweetest revenge is living a life so full of peace and joy that the shadow of the person who tried to diminish you disappears altogether. It's waking up each morning to a world you built yourself, one small choice at a time, and realizing you're finally free to stretch out in the sunlight. That's the life I have now. And let me tell you, at 62, it's better than any rotisserie chicken on a Friday night.
Share your thoughts in the comments. If you discovered that your first love was still out there decades later, would you want to see them again, or leave the past in the past? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.